Thank you. Do we have any communications from DEEP? Chris?
I don't believe I have anything new to announce tonight, other than
Okay.
maybe some personnel changes in our office. Chris Bellucci is now my assistant director of the Water Planning and Management Division, replaced Phil, who left last year. But other than that, I don't think there's anything really new to announce to the group.
Excellent. Department of Transportation, have they gotten in touch with either the Harbor Commission or the Shellfish Commission?
One thing, I think Dick is dialed in. Dick, if you hit *6 on your phone, you should be able to unmute. I do see the phone number dialed in. If you could hear this, Dick, *6 will unmute you and you'll be able to speak.
Okay, let's try that question again. Do we have any communication from the Department of Transportation to either Shellfish or the Harbor Commission?
Oh, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. John was here. John, did you guys get any communication?
No, Joe.
Okay. Has anybody heard from the Department of Agriculture for any reason? Okay. Department of Health? Bill?
Nothing this week, no.
Okay. And Harbor Commission, we already did. Okay. Old business. Recommendations for commissions and the city. That's what we're going to go through today. And the mission statement was sent out to you, and hopefully we're going to go through that. So let's go to the recommendations and report. And on the sheets that I sent you, it would probably be on the 3rd page if you have it on hard copy. Now, believe it or not, I would be okay with sending it out in a rough form, just as it is, without elaborating it and without getting into too much detail and without providing recommendations for the agencies, because the agencies that are involved with each one of these should know more about this than we do. And that's the primary reason that these talking points should be sent out. If any department needs clarification, then they could simply ask for it and we could give it to them. But I don't want to make this a long line and a long laundry list. But if you have anything you want to input, I'd be happy to put it down or revise it in any way. So I'm tossing it out to you, Jeff.
Of course, now I lost it. I was just looking at it, but the one thing that stood out, Joe, is the recommendation concerning structures and construction in flood-prone areas.
Yep.
And I would strongly recommend you delete that as a recommendation. It's not feasible because so much of the shoreline, we have to look at the FEMA maps, but much of the shoreline is within some sort of a flood designation. And to talk about removing development from the flood-prone area is almost like even though we don't mean to say it, it's like we're proposing to take private property.
What we could do is what they have done out west and in Oregon and parts of California is over a period of time, when the areas have flooded, they have eliminated the homes that have been flooded and totaled. And they've done it one at a time. And they do it by declaring eminent domain.
Yeah, that's just my opinion. I don't think I would vote to approve something that had that recommendation in it. Especially, we need to have the flood insurance map to see the amount of properties that we're talking about. And then, the FEMA regulations, if you are damaged over 50% of the structure of the building, you can't get rebuilt. But yeah, I would like to look at the FEMA maps and maybe craft that recommendation in a different way that we can promote, adherence to FEMA restrictions and maybe some changes in the zoning regulations. But just to say that, it's our goal to remove all development from the floodplain, I don't believe is a reasonable. That's my opinion.
Anybody else on that? No? Yes? Diane?
I mean, just on that, on the one, on
Just on that one.
Jeff's first point. Yeah, what I'd like to see us do on that particular point would be to something to do with encouraging, since planning and zoning currently has the responsibility of making sure when someone wants to build within a floodplain, I think that it would be good to have a mention of coordination or review, but we can't ban, unfortunately, we cannot, unless the zone changes, and in some towns, they have zones that are riparian corridors. I mean, we have to change, I'm open to it, having ordinances that protect certain areas, certain river bases, riparian rights are, but I don't think as written, I agree with Geoff that wording is not going to pass muster, but I do like to have some mention of floodplain development.
Yeah, no, I would agree. But I think before we do anything with that, we need to be familiar with the city's floodplain regulations, which I don't recall right now, and also the flood zone map. Because I bet large parts of all the residential neighborhoods are within some floodplain designation, as would be Manresa Island.
Yep.
If we're talking about redevelopment and beneficial use and what's the future there, we would be precluding any, but I just think that needs more thought.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, Geoff makes an excellent point there. And I do, to add to it, I do remember at some point, probably about 20 years ago, when I first started at DEEP, NRCS did have some funding to buy dwellings that were within the riverine floodplain areas in the Norwalk watershed. And I don't think that really progressed very far. And I'm sure that kind of money isn't floating around at this point in time.
So the city has a GIS map showing the floodplains. And when you look at it, it is a huge section of South Norwalk.
Yeah.
And the reality is we know floods are going to happen more frequently. And the reality of that is we can either deal with it sooner rather than later. And that's why it was put there. So I'll see if I can retweet it. If any of you have any suggestions, you can send them to me and I'll revise that and get it out. Diane?
Apologies for sending, I did send an email just recently within the last half hour where I just reiterated, I sent it to all of you, reiterated the potential of putting certain categories and with our recommendations, because that way I believe they'll be more user-friendly to whomever we work with on the recommendations. And so I did add some additional recommendations, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I was only able to get it to you this evening. But if everyone could look in their email list from me, you'll see some general categories where we begin probably with water quality, then water quantity, then land use, then education. And because many of the recommendations fall under those categories, I just think it would be an easier read and easier to use.
I agree, Diane. I think those are good categories, and that would help us to group them that way. I mean, would it make any sense to propose, I don't know if this is a good suggestion or not, but to propose consideration of increasing the setbacks that the city requires? I know that's a zoning. I don't know if this is out of our wheelhouse, but in terms of, I know like in Wilton, there are 100-foot setbacks from any waterways. And I believe in Norwalk, it's 25 feet.
That's on the list I sent you.
Oh, that's on the list? Okay.
That's a conservation issue too.
Oh, that's where you proposed increasing it to 50 feet. Okay, I did see that, yeah.
Now that's not an easy thing to do because of the use of the harbor and the fact that if you did it to 50 feet, a lot of the marinas would have to cope with that too. And some of them might be able to because their buildings might be back 50 feet, but not all of them. How many of this group want to see this put together in categories? They think it would be a better sell. Raise your hands. Okay. Chris, I can't see. Is your hand up? Okay. So we'll put it in categories. Okay. Any other suggestions with this? Jeff?
Yeah, I would also, I think Joe personally object to the recommendation that talks about reducing population growth rate. I think that's beyond our purview, and it weakens what other recommendations we might want to make. But again, that's my opinion.
That can be controlled by the housing that is being developed. And we can restrict development. And I think in discussions we've had as a group, Jeff, I don't think anybody here has been happy with the amount of development that's taken place within the city. Am I wrong with that perception, or am I right?
I think you're right, but I think I agree with Jeff that feels just a little outside of our purview. And if we want to, I think as one of your other points is about the strain on the sewage system, it seems to me like maybe making specific suggestions or recommendations that would reduce pressure on sewage systems and stormwater overflow, combined sewage overflow systems, that might make more sense for us to be more specific. That's why I sent around also last minute an article from the Times actually yesterday about the Blackwater redevelopment and new development in San Francisco, but also in New York City. They're having office buildings reuse water for flushing toilets and irrigation. And in San Francisco, it's 1/3 of water that's used in office buildings. So that's the kind of thing, green infrastructure things that we could talk about that would reduce the pressure, that might make more sense.
I agree. I actually have been uttering the phrase green infrastructure for several years now. And so I would add that to my list under both quantity and quality. I wanted to also suggest that the issue that Louise just brought up, one thing that, Joe, I know that you had mentioned water utilities. Those are the public water utilities owned by the quasi-municipal agencies of first and second taxing district. But we also must include roughly 22% of our city includes people on private drinking water wells that are impacted by, at times, some unwise land use development or climate change, droughts. And they also have usually, not always, and we could find out these numbers, a greater percentage also has their own septic systems. So for instance, what I would like us to do is consider recommending that our Conservation Commission or Public Works looks at asking for an ordinance for pump outs of septic systems, because that makes a big difference. If a whole neighborhood all of a sudden has problems with their septic systems, which hasn't happened except when those septic systems are built in a wetland, which they shouldn't have been years ago, that could extend sewer mains and cause more growth where you may not want it. So I just want us to cull out that category of private drinking water wells and private septic.
Okay, now a thought for Diane and for Louise. Would you be okay then if the city increased its population another 10 to 20,000 people simply because they put in green infrastructure and recycled their water?
But I mean, that's not the point. I
That-
agree with
that is
you.
part of the
that
point.
I would not like that, but we're not creating a wish list of what we would love the city to look like. The reality is that this commission's job is not to determine whether or not development continues in the city. So I think that we can be most useful if we give specific feedback. Like, I agree with Diane that having an ordinance that, you know, where the city keeps track of when septics are maintained so that we know which ones are leaking, you know, which ones are not leaking. That is something that would help water quality and would keep a spotlight on, you know, that source of the problem. I mean, I just think specific actions that the city could actually do is going to be more useful than a large wish list, which we could have a large wish list on the side, but I think we could also add specific actions.
Excuse me, there's one other thing though. If you look at our sewer plant, you ask them what the capacity is, you'll never get a straight answer. And we should know what the capacity of that sewer plant is. If you're building, your infrastructure is getting bigger. If the sewer plant becomes at a point where it rains, we instantly go into bypass. It does this, we instantly go into bypass. And I think that's our biggest problem is we have to know what our sewer plant can do before we can go any farther and say, listen, you built 700 units and the sewer plant can only take 600 more.
And doesn't
And be
the
comfortable.
department do that? I mean, isn't that the job of the Department of Health to do that math?
I thought,
Yeah,
I think so, but
the code enforcement, when there's a large apartment building, the mall, I don't know what the cutoff is, maybe it's by square foot. They have to go through the code enforcement committee called CEAC, C-E-A-C, with Bill Ireland, and then he calls in all the utilities, including Eversource, whatever water company that pipe is in, the sewage treatment plant. And, you know, a lot of us are sometimes skeptical. They keep saying, yes, yes, we can do it. Now, keep in mind, the sewage treatment plant was over-engineered to accommodate growth. And I agree with Joe's point, except it is the planning and zoning and the planning committee of the Common Council and the planning and zoning commission's job to decide, and we have input, and that's why I think we can influence and collaborate with them. But I don't believe it's kind of out of our bailiwick to determine how much is too many people. We can influence to assure that there is capacity in our sewage treatment plant, also with our septic systems. I mean, that they all interconnect.
yeah, but the thing is, you look in the last 3 years, you have up at Norton's, 300 and something units, I guess it is, Water Street, West Avenue, up at on Connecticut Avenue. I mean, we're having more units done than anything else, and I haven't got a straight answer on what the capacity our sewer plant can do. And every time we've gone to a wastewater treatment meeting, they go into executive session. We're not getting a straight answer.
Well, that should be,
And that's what bothers me.
sure. Yes, I agree.
And
Because it is, the sewer plant helps with the water quality. You know,
and not only that, the water that goes into that plant has to come from somewhere. And twice this summer, They have admitted that they were short water earlier in the summer before we started to get rain. And that wasn't even the top of the drought. That was the beginning of a drought. So what we're not looking at as far as growth within the city is a sustainable growth.
Right. I think we all agree with you, Joe. We're just talking
Yeah.
about how to word it, you know, and
Correct.
exactly how to frame it so that we have
Correct.
impact. I mean, everybody agrees with you.
Yeah.
And I agree with you about water quantity being an issue too, but I don't think, for example, that we should suggest deepening reservoirs, because I think that's also outside of our expertise, and it's also it's so complicated. These issues about how to bring more water to the coastal cities, that's being handled at the state level by the Water Planning Council. I mean, I think we should go to those meetings and we should pay attention. But I think that you'll get a huge pushback from, you know, upriver if you start talking about taking more water out of those environments by deepening reservoirs or things. I just think we have to be careful about a broad thing. Like, I'm not comfortable saying that we recommend deepening reservoirs. I agree with you that we have huge concerns about water quantity and demands on water, but I don't want to say that.
When John Romano talked me into taking this responsibility, I told John that I can tend to be insensitive at times and don't mind pushing back. And part of our job is to create an awareness. People don't have to be happy with what they're seeing or reading or hearing, but they have to be aware of it. And if it's not said at some point, we're negligent if we're aware of it.
We should have a category that it addresses our concerns about water quantity, but we should not, I'm just saying we shouldn't specifically advocate for deepening reservoirs. I just think I know from having tried to talk to the First Taxing District about that versus, you know, increasing the height of the group's reservoir dam. It's such a complicated, you have to be an engineer to make a request a recommendation like that. We're not engineers. So I think we should stay away from saying that specifically, but I do think we should advocate for, you know, water conservation and consideration of water constraints on when there's new development, and those topics I agree with.
Okay,
And
now
maybe there should be more funding towards education of the public about water conservation. That's the kind of thing we could advocate for.
Now, I'm going to push back on that, Louise, because water conservation also requires engineers too.
Right, but we can all do water conservation education. You don't have to be an engineer to let people know about the fact that we've had, you know, except for this year, a 5 or 6 year drought, and that, you know, all the issues that we are all familiar with around this that most people aren't. So that is something we can recommend.
We've been short water 3 years in a row. Now, if that pattern continues, what's it going to be like in 10 years?
Well,
when
going to be
the
coming from
population
Bridgeport
continues to
so
grow?
far. I mean, we know what it looks like. It looks like building new pipes from Bridgeport down here.
And Joe, nobody is disagreeing what you're saying. Nobody. All we're doing is saying we need to put it into a format that stays within our realm of responsibility. And like Louise said, there's a lot of things we could do and say that was within our purview that can affect, that may have the same effect without saying, you know, you can do this, you can't do that. That's what we're saying.
Okay. See, I did not want to make recommendations on how things were done. It's just, this is what we're aware of. It's a problem. And then whatever department is involved with it, they should be able to take it and work with it.
Yeah, but then if you do it that way, then in essence, you may lose our influence. Because you're just saying, you know what, guys, these are your problems, go figure it out. We're not effective as a committee if we do it that way.
But at the same time, we're not effective if we start telling people what to do and how to do it.
Well, we're not telling them what to do. Our committee is to advise and make recommendations.
Right.
That's different than telling someone what to do.
Did Joe, did we, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I raised my hand. No, I don't, it's a
Go
good
ahead.
discussion, but did we agree as a group that water supply and distribution was part of our mission? Which started out with, you know, the 30 plus years ago with the water quality in Norwalk Harbor.
I agree that it is part of the impact on water quality. Absolutely is. Diane?
Yeah, I agree with you, Joe. Geoff, you make a good point. I mean, when I was listing and send that email to all of you about the different categories, I thought, well, we may make a discussion about getting rid of the water quantity, but they're integrally connected. As you know, if there's drawdown in the Broad River First Taxing District well field, the water quality can be decreased, and they are interconnected. I think it would be refreshing and appropriate for water quantity to be a category, including some of the things that Louise mentioned and I've mentioned and others.
Well, we spent in excuse me, in Fairfield, a significant amount of time reviewing Aquarian's proposal to divert water from the, well, I forget the name, but from the Hemlocks Reservoir in Fairfield, and all the potential impacts on downstream water quality. So I understand that. But what we found in that review is there's significant room for improvement in the way that the utility companies are regulated, I believe. And so maybe the recommendation has to do somehow with future proposals to withdraw water from the Norwalk River watershed or from the Cannondale well field, something like that, in terms of understanding and addressing its potential impacts on the Norwalk River and the harbor and water quality, and focus on something like that instead of the review of proposals for their impacts, and to do it in a better way than is handled now. Chris may disagree with me, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement about the way that the water utility companies are regulated by DEEP.
Chris, any thoughts on that?
Well, we just developed our state water plan. Department of Health is also involved, as is DPUC, PURA. So, there's a lot of players involved, and they've been through quite a process to revise a lot of our regulations and how we govern the state use of the state's water. So feel free to comment to the state water plan people, and put those recommendations down on paper, how you think the revision should be made. There's an open process, so.
Okay, any other comments on, and John?
I'm just laying back listening. I come from the same school as you, Joe. I don't mind making noise and stirring things up. At the end of the day, we're going to be the finger that's pointed at. If there's water shortages, issues, quality, we don't want to become another Michigan and then find out too late that there's big problems and issues. We're on the forefront, in theory, in conjunction with DEEP and state agencies. It doesn't seem like Norwalk in itself has given much consideration to the water. Is there enough? I know prior to about 25,000 other units, we've had droughts, severe droughts, where we cut off the use of water. And now we're 25,000 units later with another 15, 20,000 units ahead of us in the immediate future. There's got to be a reality to, to overuse of water. We're not creating more. We're not putting desalination units in.
Well, I mean, everybody agrees with that and no one opposes that. I mean, we all think that we should have a category water quantity and we can say, you know, our committee is opposed to rampant development that continues to strain the water supply or something. But I think as far as being a useful list of recommendations, we need something more specific than that to accompany, you know, the broad statement that
No
concerned about
question about that, because you have to quantify your statements, whatever is going on. Absolutely, there's no question about it. But in the meantime, it doesn't mean that we should just backburn or something like that. We have to be, I would think, more proactive. That's all.
yeah, I
want.
agree. I agree with you.
Diane?
So I think that I feel that we should use the terminology of art for today, which is sustainable development. That can mean many things. I am not in agreement that having rental apartments in and of itself is a bad idea in a city of our size. However, have we had too many of them? Yes, many of us feel there seems to be. But remember, back in the 70s, I think it was, there was rampant condominium development. You know, was that a good idea? And then in the 90s and 80s that I read, there was rampant big box. You know, it depends upon the planning and zoning and land use and the leadership of that time. So I feel I don't want to declare that we've had rampant apartment development. I would rather we use not a weasel word of sustainable development, but we expect our city to match its development plans and land use plans with the resources and making sure they're sustainable, renewable, etc. Instead of, I think that would mean more and it would give us the flexibility to chime in when we think something is not being done correctly. That's why I bring us to CEAC again, CEAC, either Harbor Commission or Water Quality Commission has a seat at the table when they meet. They don't meet regularly. They meet when there's a certain large amount, like an apartment building. They meet and unfortunately, I think a lot of times utilities, one of the problems I believe in Norwalk, having come here to the water company, is that our city is not in charge of the two water utilities. We have two quasi-municipal agencies that operate separately and we either believe them. I've urged the health director to have second opinions about some of the issues that have come up about drinking water. And these are, especially with PFAS in the well field, and all you can do, you know, we can advocate for being watchdogs of the utilities and the planning and zoning departments.
Any other comments?
Diane, are you familiar with the Sustainable Connecticut program? Sustainable CT?
Oh yes, very, very much so. We are actually a bronze, the city applied and became a bronze member, but some of it's hasn't really been developed enough yet. It is, yes, I am familiar with it and it is one way, but a better way I feel for our city is they're doing the zoning regulation changes now. We should, as a group and individual committees, get really involved in influencing what ends up being the zoning, revised zoning regs, because that can make a difference in water quantity, quality, preserving certain areas. That is even more effective.
Right. So isn't that what we want to participate in the amendment or the modification of the zoning regulations in a way that serves to achieve some of these goals that we're talking about?
Yes.
We want to influence those zoning regulations.
Yeah, I agree.
To include the green infrastructure and the deal with the floodplain issues as well as water dependent issues.
And
So-
also the industrial zoning review that's happening. We should also be.
Yeah.
And Joe, these recommendations, if we finally get through this and present them, that's a great mechanism use when they're having these zoning changes
Yeah.
discussed.
I think that's a great idea to spend maybe a little more time on these recommendations and have them presented to planning and zoning. And we expect to have the zoning regulations make progress towards addressing some of these recommendations.
I'm afraid that the older I get, the more impatient I get. And the
No, Joe, it's called wisdom. Wisdom.
My wife would disagree with you. But the reality of this, Jeff, is I don't want to wait too long. Because if we take another 2-3 months to get this out, God knows what other things have passed and not passed. I'd rather seed thought, if nothing else. And then if more has to be added to any of these committees or to any of the agencies within the city, we can do that. But we should seed thought as soon as possible.
Maybe the next step could be to reorganize it according to Diane's categories and add some of those, comments from tonight, and then take another look via email, before the next meeting. Does that?
I think one clear thing has to be to focus on influencing the zoning regulation.
I agree. Yeah.
I know I have property in Blue Hill, Maine. And it's a small town. But God bless them, they have limited their growth. And it was real simple. They did it through zoning. You can only subdivide a piece of property so many ways. And then you're shut down. And it can only be subdivided once every, I think it's 10 years. So if I have 20 acres and I want to sell 10 away, I may have to wait 10 years before I can do it. So it's the fact that this city has grown so rapidly is absolutely crazy. And it makes me wonder if anybody has any concept of all the intricacies of what it takes to be sustainable. And if we don't seed that thought soon, especially and God bless them, I don't think we're going to be meeting personally for possibly another few months, if not a year. And Jim, I hate to break that news to you, but I think if you're watching what's going on TV right now,
Yeah,
I think we're stuck with Zooming. So
I agree.
I'd rather get this out there as quick as we can because everybody else is Zooming and not meeting personally. Diane?
So I don't share your conclusion, Joe. I think the topics you brought up are good, very good topics. I just want to see if we can wordsmith them in a way that influences other entities that have direct responsibility to either enforce, to land use, to make sure keep growth in check. And I don't mind that we mention it or give an example in a sequential order in the categories like what I put together. But in Maine, you mentioned, and that's good, you mentioned that example. There are many other ways to control growth. One is electing your planning and zoning commissioners, like in Westport and in other towns. Another is elections are another way. I'm not implying that, I'm just saying there are lots of ways, including advocating during these public discussions and also making sure, I think John Romano asked the consultant for the zoning regulation rewrite that the Harbor Commission be met with as a special entity. And I would love, John, if you would allow the Water Quality Subcommittee to sit in on that, because I think it would be even better. So I do agree with what John asked in the live meeting, the public hearing that was, I think, last week. And but we have to keep after them because we got some pushback from that consultant, And I think the Harbor Commission plays such an important role in the economic life of this city. And our subcommittee does as well, that we should have a special meeting with the zoning reg. We could have that within the next month. It's not going to take months and months and months. That's not in their timeline. So anyway, that's just a thought, but it's a tool. The zoning regulations are a tool in the toolbox for maintaining water quality and water quantity.
John, did you have your hand up or were you smoking your cigar?
Smoking my cigar.
Okay.
But in big picture, Diane's right. I did, because they talked about being inclusive and reaching out. And yet, when he was pressured, the consultant said, well, we talked to some common council members and city employees. Well, that's not being inclusive.
Right.
And it's reminiscent of who they spoke to on the design of the walk bridge and all of that stuff. They hand selected a couple of different people that had their own agendas. And they wound up getting what they wanted, but they didn't speak to any of the shop owners or any of the people that were directly involved with what was going to take place over a course of time. So there's lots of ways of skinning a cat, and hopefully that this will be an open entity. I'm a little concerned because it seemed like they came in with these plans that are cookie cut from other towns and other areas and other parts of the country, and not Norwalk centric. And their claim is that they would make it Norwalk centric, but they want to make it a more modern, transportation oriented conglomerate of housing. And I don't know, that to me and to others disrupts the character of the town in many ways. So, hopefully we'll be able to give the input that is correct. And yes, I will tell them, if not at our joint meeting, because we have no idea when that's going to be, but at least recommend to them that they speak to the Water Quality Committee as well.
Could we, interrupting again, but it's because of the time urgency with respect to the zoning update, could we not formulate at least one recommendation dealing with the update to the zoning regulations and work on that in the next week or so? And I don't know if the committee can agree to that with a phone conference or a special meeting, but at least have one recommendation dealing with what we want to see addressed in the zoning update. And that's something that maybe the Shellfish Commission, the Harbor Commission, and the Water Quality Committee could all sign on to. So we want to see that update address issues of stormwater management and floodplain, proper use of the floodplain and green infrastructure and sustainability. And we looked at Stanford. Stanford has some sort of, I think I sent it to you. They have a sustainability scorecard. So a development proposal that does, in other words, it gets extra credit. If it provides some of these measures that are environmentally benefit, they get certain development privileges or added bonuses or something. I think that's something we could consider here as well.
I like that idea. Yeah.
Geoff, that reward system came up in the East Norwalk Transit-Oriented Development Plan. And one of the issues with that is that a lot of us think some of those green infrastructure and sustainability measures should be not rewarded, but should be part of the regulation. And I wanted to tell you that this zoning rewrite isn't planned to be finished until next year. So we do have time to influence. I was just suggesting that we include in the list of categories something about zoning and coordinating with zoning and redevelopment agency. And I asked that John, probably to save time and money, that water quality meets with, when the Harbor Management Commission meets with this consultant, that we are part of that discussion because they're interconnected. That's my plan.
I mean, another thing that I had put in an email that I sent, this morning, as a possible thing to add to this, a recommendation. A lot of other cities, I don't know about Stamford, but I know Hartford does, and several cities have an actual person whose job is who works for the, mayor or the city in some capacity, whose whole job is to look at sustainability and resilience and, green infrastructure. And that would be maybe somebody who could address the tree canopy issues, aside from DPW, but looking at grouping some of these issues, water quality and tree canopy, as real resilience and sustainability issues, and give someone that job so that we have a different take on it in the city. That's something I would like to see, and maybe put that out there as a possible recommendation.
Yeah, the council and some of us, like Louise and I, have been talking about this for more than a year. Initially, there was an environmental and energy task force that is no longer meeting, and that was supposed to be one of the final recommendations. But unfortunately, the leadership of that committee, I'm saying it publicly, just did not embrace it. It wasn't, it stopped meeting. So I agree that, and the council is talking about that, and some of us have given the mayor's office and others the actual sustainability plans for Bridgeport and Fairfield and Stamford, or referred to them. And yes, you're absolutely right, Louise. We, a city of this size with our wonderful resources, should have a person or a department or division that can combine all the different boards and commissions. They have to, in my opinion, look at environmental management overall, because it has to be reorganized. It's not organized well enough, other than reacting at times. There's some wonderful projects that the city has done, but it's in fits and starts. And so I agree that there needs to be a reorg.
Back to the recommendations. Are there any other recommendations there that strike a nerve in any of you? Okay, if not,
Yeah, Joe, the issue of the PFOS, I think I would like to see those grouped under water quality as contaminants. Very important.
I agree.
Indeed. Yeah, but I think we have to be very careful with our language, and because while I would like to see the health department be, and Bill's on the call now, I've said this to Tom, your predecessor, be more strategic in overseeing what the first taxing district water company is reporting about their wells that are contaminated. And I'd like to see us more assertively looking in on that. I would hope that currently PFAS and PFOS are not in that well field being distributed in the well field, and there are testing and people overseeing that. But I think we have to be careful implying that all of the drinking water has PFAS and PFOS, because I don't think that's true.
It does, Diane.
I also wanted to just add one thing about the language of that. I think that my understanding is that now those chemicals, there's like 4,000 of them. It's a class of chemicals, and they're being referred to as the PFAS chemicals. So PFOS is a specific one that's been banned and more tested for. But I think we're concerned about the whole class of chemicals. So naming specifically PFOS I think it's better to just say the class of PFAS chemicals, because they're renaming them Gen X and all these things, and they're still showing up in water. And so that's just a wordsmith thing that I would say.
Okay. They are present in the water. They are in sub-required reporting levels. However, people are still consuming it.
One thing we could do as a group is that we could lobby the state to lower the parts per trillion allowed from 7 that the EPA has to 1 that places like Vermont have, and then we could enforce that. I mean, I think this is an issue that's being dealt with on the state level, what's acceptable in drinking water. So it makes sense for us to channel our comments, around that.
Louise, I'm going to be hardcore here. This is the scientist in me. Why do we have to have any in our drinking water?
Well, I agree, but I mean, I totally agree, but I don't see, I just think that we should make, yes, it is a beautiful wish list, no PFAS in any drinking water, but I think we want to be specific when we make recommendations. So
Yeah.
that's my point.
Yeah, I just think, Joe, that items D, E, G, and M are problematic and could be rewritten. D has to do with the reservoirs. I think I might do something about, being alert and making sure that future water diversion plans don't affect the Norwalk River, something, making a more specific recommendation. And then the population growth, I think I'd rewrite that to make there's something to be concerned about sustainability, something like that. Change the language of that. And then the floodplain ones, I think both have to be the no new construction and the eliminate development. I think we've got to give some thought to that and talk about wise floodplain management. But I don't think we can say anything about that without understanding what the existing flood prone regulations are in Norwalk and the extent of the special flood hazard area. But
Sorry, Jeff.
those are my initial thoughts.
I know Dick can't speak to us tonight, but I know he has concerns that some of the points about monitoring, that some of that work is being done, and I know he wanted to contribute some comments about that. So hopefully we'll get a chance to have him add those.
Yeah, so it's continuing the existing monitoring program and something like that. But
Yeah, and that there are interns. I mean, Harbor Watch is doing a lot of that work. I don't want to speak for Dick, but I know that I want him to have the chance to add those comments.
Well, I spoke with Dick. I want us to continue our relationships, but also, if necessary, enhance our monitoring as well. Because, we could always improve or always add some other aspects of monitoring. I know that they're doing a great job though, and we should make sure we coordinate when possible with the sewage treatment plant people, because they do a lot of sampling, and I know we've had a good relationship at times with them. So, but I would love to see us enhance it.
Okay, for all of you, based on Diane's comment, I just want to share some great information for you. Chris had communicated with me a while back, and USGS has monitors in the Norwalk River and on the harbor right now. And after Chris's communication with me, I actually ran into them, and the young lady that's in charge of it here in Norwalk is Becky, and Brittany is Becky, and she's told me about where the monitors are, and we're trying to possibly get them located, one at King Chemical area and the other by the docks at the Marine Police. And I've worked with John on this. Nothing definite yet. We're waiting to see what's going to happen, whether the USGS has enough monitors to do this. But they're going to be testing for dissolved oxygen, salinity, pH, turbidity, and they're going to be doing it not at one level, but surface and bottom. And it's 24-hour monitoring. You can sit, I'll send you the links. You can sit at your desk, click on the links, and it'll tell you exactly what's going on right now, which is a wonderful thing.
Yep.
And that way, when we start seeing floating menhaden in the harbor, we can look at it and we say, well, there should be floating menhaden in the harbor. The dissolved oxygen level is down to 2, which it has been in the last couple of weeks. So it's there, and they have been told that Norwalk is a priority community, and they're going to continue to enhance the water quality testing. So that's some good news for us. Okay, we are running out of time. Any other comments on recommendations? Okay, what I will do is I'll do some rewriting, and if some of you can send me your thoughts, I'll look at them. Please don't wait for an hour before the next meeting. It won't get read, just won't get read. And any comments on the minutes? No comments on, Diane?
Just a minor, but could be important, and it's, my memory doesn't serve me, and that is in our mission statement, I thought that I had mentioned, and others had said watersheds, it's plural, because but I'd love the folks from the Harbor Commission to clarify that the Norwalk Harbor per se embraces 5 Mile River watershed and even the Saugatuck River watershed as the harbor proper, but I may be off base with that. So I guess I remember we mentioned watersheds, plural, and that's the only change.
And so Diane, the watershed of the 5 Mile River is probably, could be addressed just in terms of water quality because it's in Norwalk. But the 5 Mile River is managed by the state agency, the 5 Mile River Commission.
And it is also a separate watershed. It is the Saugatuck River watershed.
I know, but I didn't know if it was part of the harbor management plan that it embraces. If it doesn't, then we'll leave it out.
Okay. So all in favor of accepting last meeting's minutes?
Hold on, Joe, I just want to comment on Diane's comment. And then in addition, Louise informed me today that, and me and Geoff, that she is a magazine editor, and she took issue with a couple of my commas, but Louise has offered just some tweaks, and without sharing with everybody, it does not affect the material mission statement. It's only a comma here, and she changed. What was the word that you used there, Louise? What was the?
There was a split infinitive in the first sentence.
No,
I just took,
you're a teacher. Do you know what a split infinitive is?
Don't remember.
it's when you divide the infinitive from the verb, like to objectively monitor or whatever it said.
Okay, specifically, what's the change on the mission statement?
I'll send it to you, Joe. It's very minor.
I took
Okay.
2 commas out.
I'll
and
send it
did
to you.
that.
All in favor of accepting the mission statement?
Aye.
All right.
Okay. Any opposition? Excellent. Dick, can you communicate at all in any way? Negative, okay. Then move to adjourn.
So move.
So move.
Second.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're out of here.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
We'll talk soon.
7:15?
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk to you later.